So recently I tried to deploy an October CMS project and I couldn't find any clear documentation to do it. So I decided to create one myself. And that's what I'm going to be showing you guys in this video. I just think that some steps of this documentation might not be clear enough, and so that's why I decided to create a video explaining each step. So the first thing that we need to do in order to deploy an October CMS project in an EC2 AWS instance is to actually create the EC2 instance. And in order to do that, we're going to access our EC2 dashboard. If you don't know how to do this, you're simply going to search for EC2, click the EC2 service here, and here you'll see a button that says Launch Instance. This button will allow us to create a new instance, and I just want you to keep in mind a few considerations. So the first thing is that you can choose any AMI instance that you want, but you need to keep in mind that all the commands shown in this documentation were used in an Ubuntu AMI. So that's why I am going to select Ubuntu here. AMI stands for Amazon Machine Image. Next, you also need to put here a name for your instance. I'm just going to call it OctoberCMS because it's what we're going to deploy. And the next thing that you should consider is that you will need to create a key pair in order to connect your EC2 instance using SSH. This is just in case you haven't created one yet. In order to create a key pair, you simply need to come here where it says create new key pair, and you need to put a name to it, which in this case is just going to be example. And if you don't know which type to select, you might also refer to this documentation where I explain a bit the difference between each type, or you could just leave it as it is by default. When you create the key pair, you'll see that it downloads a file in your machine. This file will be used later on to connect to the EC2 instance using SSH, as I told you before. So you need to keep in mind that there's the file downloading. And the next thing is to create a security group in case you haven't created one yet. So in my case, I am going to create a security group just to show you guys the things that you need to consider when creating one. But if you already have one, you can use that. And so for creating a security group, you need to keep in mind that you should allow SSH traffic and you should also allow HTTP traffic in the port 80. By default, it allows SSH traffic, so we're simply going to allow HTTP traffic clicking here. And as you can see, it is allowing SSH traffic from anywhere. I am not going to click this because this will show my IP address, but if you only want to allow connections from your IP address from your machine, then you should select that here. The next thing that we need to do is to launch the instance. We can leave everything else as it is by default and it'll work for us. And just click here and wait for it to create the instance. Now the next step is to actually connect to the EC2 instance. And so the first thing that you need to do to connect to your EC2 instance through SSH is to change the permissions of the key pair that we downloaded before. This is just in case you haven't done it before. Let me show you. So I downloaded the example file that should be here. This is my key pair. Here it is. So I have read and write permissions. We should change these for only read permissions. So you could use this command for Unix-based systems. So in my case, the key name is example.pem. There you go. And the next thing is to connect to the EC2 instance using this command. Now, if you don't know your username or the public DNS of the instance, you could follow these steps right here. So you can click the instance you want to connect to from the list of instances. Then you can click the connect button on the top navbar, which is this one. And then under the SSH client tab, which is this one right here, you can copy the SSH command to connect to your EC2 instance, which is this one. And so this should allow you to connect to your EC2 instance. But if you see any errors, simply make sure that you change the permissions of your keeper file. And so I'm just going to paste the command here. I'm going to leave the file name as it is, but keep in mind that if you are in a different path, so in my case, the example .pem file, which is my keeper, is in the downloads folder, and I am pasting this command also in the downloads folder, so that's why it is going to work. But if it is in a different path, I should put that path here to this file. Then the username is Ubuntu, and this is the public DNS, and I'm just going to hit enter, and now I'm just going to write yes, and there you go. I am already connected to my instance through SSH. The next thing that we need to do is to install packages. Keep in mind again that the following commands are meant to be used in an Ubuntu AMI. So let's first update our packages running this command right here. Then we will need to install Apache, which is what we're going to use as our web server. Let's just wait for this to finish. There you go. Yes. And now I am going to install MySQL-Server. In my case, I am going to use MySQL to create my database for my October CMS project. But if you're using a different database, such as PostgreSQL or something different, then you should look up for the command to install PostgreSQL. But for now, let's just keep it with MySQL. So I'm just going to install that too. Yes. And the next step is to install PHP and other PHP libraries needed for October, and also for Apache, and for basically the Laravel project, because remember that October CMS is a CMS created with the Laravel framework, which is a PHP framework, so that's why we need PHP and many other libraries. So let's just wait for this to finish, and once it's done, we can now paste this command. So this is going to install a bunch of different libraries, and then we can finally install Composer. So Composer is what we're going to use to actually create our OctoberCMS project. And so let's just wait for this to finish. The first command is to install Composer. Then we simply need to move a file to finish the installation. So let's just install Composer using curl, and then let's move this composer.phar file. There you go. And now we need to create our database. So as I mentioned before, I'm going to use MySQL, but if you're using a different service, you should keep in mind that these commands won't work for you. So the first thing that we need to do is to log into our MySQL. In case you were asked to enter a password when you install MySQL, that password that you use there is the password that you're going to use here to connect to MySQL to login. Now in my case, it didn't ask me for any password, so it'll just be blank. So I'll just hit enter here. There you go. And now you can create your database using this command. Of course, you should replace DB name for your actual database name, but I'm just going to leave it as it is for the sake of this explanation. Then we can show the databases. This is just optional because this is just to check if we actually created the database. And then the next step is to set a root user password. So here's the actual command, and here's an example with the root user. So this is the command that I'm going to use because I'm working with the root user. But in your case, you might want to create a user because that is considered to be more secure. But I'm just going to use the root user for this example. So I'm going to use this command: alter user root at localhost identified by and the password. In my case, the password is going to be 123. just to keep it simple. And then we want to change the authentication method of the root user to MySQL native password. This is because if you don't do this, then when you're installing your October project, you might run to this error, which is 1698. And so to avoid this error, you should run this command. But if you want to try without running this and you don't have any errors, then that'll be great. But since I faced this error before, I'm just going to run it here. So again, this is with the root user. You should keep this in mind. So if you create a user yourself, then you should replace root here for the actual username that you set. And again, my password is going to be 123. There you go. And now we can exit this because we're not going to work on MySQL anymore. And then we want to navigate to the installation path. In most cases, it's going to be this path, but if you're hosting many websites, then you might want to have a subdirectory here. But keep in mind that if you do have different websites hosted in your server, in your EC2 instance, then you should also replace this path in the configuration of the server. But in this explanation, we're just going to host one site. So I'm simply going to navigate to this path and I'm going to run all the commands here. So the first thing that we need to do is to remove the default HTML file that is here. So if I list all files in this directory, you'll see that there's an index.html. So to remove that file, we can simply run this command. This is because when we install our October CMS project, there is going to be an index.php file, and we want that PHP file to run first. We don't want this index.html file to generate any inconvenience there. Then we want to create our October project in the current path. So this is what this actually means. We're creating a project, an October project using Composer, which is what I told you guys before, and we're creating it in the current path. I'll type here yes. And the next step is to install and set up October. So let's just wait for this to finish. Okay, so I think I'm going to skip this setup part because you should already know how to set up an October CMS project. And I also don't want to show the my October CMS key. But let's just simply run into this, and I'm going to skip the key part. So I'm just going to leave the default values here. Now here in the database engine, as I mentioned before, I'm using MySQL, but if you're using a different engine, then you should select that here. The database host as default, the database port. Now the database name, in my case, is DB name, but if you use a different name, then you should put that here. The database login is root, and then the database password is 123. And also, if you created a different user and you're using that for the database privileges, then you should put that user here and the password here. Now, I am going to install the demonstration content because I am not actually going to deploy any theme for now. I'm just going to show you guys how the deployment works. But I am going to show you how to upload content in case you want to upload your own theme to the EC2 instance. And then the license key. So this is the part that we're going to skip. Okay, so now that the installation has finished, the next step is to add our October theme. So as I mentioned before, I'm going to use the demonstration theme that comes by default when you install and when you set up the October project, but I'm going to show you guys how you can upload content to your EC2 instance. So you can do it by using GitHub, which is what I recommend you guys. It is easier. You simply create a repository, upload all your files there, and then you simply clone that repository in your EC2 instance. But if you don't want to create a repository for your theme, then you could also use scp. So scp is basically a command that allows you to copy files from your machine into the EC2 instance by using SSH. What you will need to do is to follow these steps in order to copy all the files from your machine of your October theme into the EC2 instance machine. So the first thing that you need to do is to create a folder for your theme in the EC2 instance. Okay, so keep that in mind. We're still in the EC2 instance, and I'm going to create the theme folder in the HTML themes folder. So let's just navigate to the themes folder, and here I will create the theme folder. I'm just going to name it as it is in the example. I don't have privileges, so I should use sudo for this. I think I'm using sudo here. No, I'm not, so I should change this. Then the next step is to change Ubuntu user permissions in the destination folder, which again is in the EC2 instance. This is our destination folder. So let's just run this command. There you go. Now, just to make sure, here's our theme folder, right? And now in our computer, in the computer where we have the theme that we want to upload, we should navigate to the theme folder path. So I'm just going to exit the EC2 instance. I am going to navigate to my desktop because I don't have nothing here, so I can show you guys. I am going to create a theme example folder, and I am going to navigate to it because that's what it says here. So theme example. Now here we want to run our command to copy every file from this folder recursively into our destination folder, which is the theme folder that we created in the EC2 instance. I am going to create some files here as examples, and I am going to upload them. So let me just create two files. There you go. I have two files there. And now I am going to run this command. So the command is this one right here, and here's an example. So let me just copy this example. And as you see, the first thing is that we're using super user permissions with the command sudo. Then we're using scp, and then -i is to specify the path to our key, which in my case is in the downloads folder. Sorry, is in the downloads folder, and it is called example.pem. Then we need to specify after the r parameter, we need to specify the path of the files that we want to copy. So in my case is the current path, right? Because I am actually in the theme folder. And then we need to specify the, well, again, this is the user, which is Ubuntu, the instance public DNS, which we have here. Is all of this. So let me just paste it here. And then we need to specify the path, the destination path. So the path to the folder where we want to copy all our files, which in my case is theme folder, and it is inside the themes directory, in the HTML directory, in the www directory, in the var directory. But it might be different in your case. You might have named this folder differently, so you should make sure that you put the right name here. I'm just going to hit enter, put my password, yes, and it should work. There you go. So you see the two files were copied from my machine to the EC2 instance. So I should still see the two files here, you see? And if I go to my downloads folder, if I navigate to the downloads folder, and I connect to my EC2 instance again using this command, and if I navigate to the path where we copy the files, I should see the two files. You see example.txt and example2.txt. So this is how you can copy all your theme files using SCP into a remote machine. But as you see, I think it's easier to use GitHub. Now that we have our theme in the EC2 instance, we should activate or enable this theme running this command, which is php artisan theme use theme name. The theme name is the folder name. So in my case, it will be theme folder. And in order to run this command, you need to make sure that you are in the root directory of your Laravel or October CMS project, which in my case is var www html. But it might be different in your case if you're hosting different websites, multiple websites. Sorry. I'm not going to enable any theme because, as I mentioned before, I'm going to use the demonstration theme. So I'm just going to leave it as it is. But if you uploaded your own theme using SCP, or if you cloned a repository using GitHub, you should make sure to enable it. And now the last step is to set up our server. So in order to do that, we're going to edit the Apache 2 configuration file. Also, this will be different if you're not using Apache, if you're using a different service such as Nginx as your web server. But in my case, I'm using Apache, so I'm simply going to run this command. So this command is to edit this file using nano, and we need to add this block into our Apache 2 configuration file. You can add it anywhere, but I'm going to add it where I have the other directory blocks, which is here. So I'm just going to paste it, Control X to exit, Y to confirm, enter to save in that file. And you can save changes and exit. Now, we need to set up and enable our virtual host. So in order to do that, you need to create a site configuration file with the project name. This file will be created in this path, etc/apache2/sites available. You can create it with any name that you want. I'm just going to leave it as it is in the example, but you can change this if you want. So in my case is projectname.conf, but you can change this name and just leave the .conf. Let's just hit enter here, and now that we have created this file, we should simply paste all of this, which is the configuration. You can add here the server admin email. You could also change the document root in case you created a subdirectory in the HTML folder. And you could also add here your domain and your server alias in case you have a domain already. And that's basically it. Once you're done, Control X, Y, enter, and that's it. Then you need to enable the virtual host using this command right here. Keep in mind that you should replace the project name.conf for the actual project name that you used when you created this file. But because I use project name, I'm just going to leave it as it is. And then we need to restart our Apache server just to make sure everything is working now with the new configuration. And the last thing is to add permissions to our project folder. So I found some errors in the past related to permissions in October. So that's why I added this step. But if you don't face any issues regarding some October permissions, then you can simply skip this part. So I'm just going to run this command, and now we should be able to go to our instance here, and by copying this public IPv4 address and pasting it, we should be able to see our default October theme. There you go. So it worked, guys. I hope this documentation is helpful for someone. And that's basically it. Have a nice one.